Hey folks, it's TT. I have been doing a blog for a while talking about the different books that I've been reading, kind of just as a way to get myself motivated to read some more, and I figured now that I have this channel going, I will just talk about it on here instead. The novel that I read this week is called Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. It is the story of a young girl's family coping after she drowned unexpectedly. I was really excited about this book because I had recently read her newer novel, Celeste Ng's newer novel called Little Fires Everywhere. I have it right here. You can shit on me if you want for having the TV cover, but it was $8 cheaper than the good cover. I'm actually kind of okay with it though, because the Hulu series based on Little Fires Everywhere is incredible. You should definitely check it out. Like, if you don't have the time to read a 500-page novel, which you should make the time for because it's a really great book, the TV show is honestly probably just as good. It stars Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington, and they are exceptional in this book, in the show. It's like one of those roles where Reese Witherspoon is so good at playing this character that you start to like hate Reese Witherspoon, even though you already used to love her. But it's not just that. It's like all the acting is really good. The themes that are tackled in the book are all addressed really well in the show. In fact, probably kind of built on because they added a few extra storylines in there that really add to the whole experience. So definitely check out the Hulu show, even if you're not going to read the book. You should do both though. Both of these novels cover really similar themes. They're both about suburban life and domesticity and the occasional desire to escape that. But I'd kind of like to start where the book starts off, which is with Lydia's death. Both of these books kind of follow that format where they start with the action and then backtrack and let you try to kind of think about where the action is going to go. And sometimes I think that's kind of a ripoff, but it really works for both of these novels. So I'm really here to talk about Everything I Never Told You today, but it's interesting to me that Little Fires Everywhere follows a very similar format. At the beginning of Little Fires Everywhere, for example, it opens letting us know that the main character's house has just burned down and that the police think someone did it on purpose. And the entire novel is building up to how did we get there? Who did it? Is it who we think it is, or is it someone else? Is it why we think it is, if it is who we think it is? Everything I Never Told You is very similar in that way. The very first line of Everything I Never Told You is, Lydia is dead, but they don't know it yet. I love this beginning. It reminds me of my favorite first line of any book ever, which is the first line of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Marley was dead to begin with. A Christmas Carol is a book about redemption, and in that book, the opening line gives us a sense that it's already too late for someone. This book is not about redemption. It's about family. It's about relationships, and more than anything else, it's about secrets, about everything you never told each other. Even if you didn't realize by the title that this was going to be a book about secrets, you figure it out pretty quickly. And it gives us that same kind of helplessness that A Christmas Carol's first line does. We as a reader might find out a little bit more about Lydia's secrets, but the family never will. And they're never going to stop wondering about them either. So Lydia is the middle child, and quite obviously the favorite of both of her parents, Marilyn and James, in this family dynamic. James is a Chinese-American college professor in the 1970s, and for most of his life he's been the only Chinese person he knew. This caused a lot of issues for him. He didn't really fit in, nobody liked him, nobody really gave him a chance. He tried to combat this by becoming so immersed in American culture. He became obsessed with cowboys and the American West, and he became a professor teaching about the history of these things. That's where he met Marilyn. See, Marilyn was a very forward-thinking feminist woman in the 1950s. Most of the book is based in the 70s, by the way. But she met James at college, where he was her professor. She had big dreams of becoming a doctor, but she met a man instead and got pregnant. Now, the theme of having to give up dreams for motherhood is pretty prominent in both of these novels. In Little Fires Everywhere, for example, we learned that Reese Witherspoon's character in the show, Elena, she really wanted to be a serious reporter, and she also wanted to have a family, but by the time she got to having her 4th child, it became really clear that most of her dreams were not going to come true, and so she started to hold a lot of resentment for her youngest child, Izzy. In this book, we have something kind of different, because Marilyn does realize that her family is interfering with her becoming a doctor, and she even tries at a certain point to leave her family and go back to college, but it doesn't really work out because she finds out that she's pregnant with her youngest. We don't have the same resentment between Marilyn and Hannah that we have between Elena and Izzy in Little Fires Everywhere, but we do have this sort of sense that she doesn't like her as much. Instead of leaning so heavily on the strenuous relationship between Marilyn and her youngest, the way that they do in Little Fires Everywhere, they lean really heavily on the idea that maybe Marilyn's older daughter can live out her dreams for her. So Marilyn really starts to live vicariously through Lydia. Lydia, who is traumatized by the fact that her mother tried to leave her, thinks that maybe she had done something wrong, and in order to keep her mother there and loving her, she will just do anything that her mother tells her to do. She lets her mother try to groom her to becoming a doctor. She pretends to be interested in science and math and all of these things just so that it will keep her mother close to her. The result is Marilyn starts to hinge so many dreams on Lydia's shoulders that she can't possibly withstand all the weight. But where Marilyn favors Lydia because she likes herself and she sees her own potential reflected in her daughter, James starts to favor Lydia because he doesn't like himself and she's the least like him. See, James never really had any friends, mostly because people were really racist and he was the only Chinese person around. So James had already long since given up on the idea that Nath would be the social butterfly that he always hoped that he would be. He saw just too much of himself in Nath, and it caused a lot of contention between them. Lydia wasn't very popular either, but she was really good at faking it. She became so obsessed with keeping her parents happy that she would pretend to have friends and pretend to have conversations on the phone every day and talk about people that she didn't really know very well. So after Lydia's death, a lot of her lives start to fall apart, and we can sort of see different angles of different relationships based on what everyone knew about her. Her closeness to her brother is really emphasized. Nath and Lydia had been super close for a really long time, and in fact, he was the only one who knew most of her secret. So the book really explores the way that siblings relate to each other as well, and for much of the story, Nath is really the only person that knows Lydia's secrets. In fact, he's kind of the partner in crime in a lot of them. And that's how sibling relationships really work. But eventually, there starts to be a bit of a rift between the two of them. Nath knows that he is not favored by either of their parents, and it's pretty obvious that Lydia is. And from that point on, they start to branch off. They have their own secrets. They don't tell each other everything anymore. So much of this book hinges on secrecy. What you don't tell your parents. What you don't tell your crush. What you don't tell your wife. It starts to get really interesting when it turns its attention to what you don't even tell your siblings. And the story of these relationships really, it's strong enough that it distracts a little bit from the mystery of the story. Now, it's not like a mystery novel. It's not like a murder mystery where you're thinking, who killed Lydia? Even though, like, the idea is broached that she might have been murdered, but it's never really the focus of the story. It seems pretty likely from early on in the story that Lydia wasn't murdered, even though certain characters think she was. And the focus then, the mystery, really becomes, if she killed herself, then why? But sometimes the why isn't really why you're reading anymore. sometimes you really just want to get to know Nath and what he's going through, and Hannah and how she deals with being basically invisible. And I just realized I didn't even mention Hannah until now, and I think that kind of works. Hannah is the youngest child, and for about the first half of the book, she's barely mentioned. That's very intentional. Hannah exists in the shadow of Lydia. Nathan, he is a disappointment, so he learns to blend in. But at least his parents are aware of him. Hannah, on the other hand, she just kind of fades into the background. And there's not really space for her until Lydia stops taking up so much. But this outside perspective kind of gives Hannah a special position when you think about the themes of secrecy. Nobody's filling in Hannah on what's going on in the story. She has to figure everything out for herself, and she discovers a lot of secrets without really knowing what they mean, but she comes across them on her own. But in the end, Lydia didn't just have a lot of secrets. Who she was a secret. Her whole life had revolved around friends she didn't have, ambitions that weren't hers. Even up to her final moments, Lydia's not really sure who she is. And it's kind of sad that her family's never going to know who she would have been if they hadn't tried to force her to be something else. If this book has a moral, I would say it's to be honest. Not just to not keep secrets, but to live honestly. I have a lot more I could say about this book, but I really don't want to spoil it, because I do think that if you're watching this, you should read it. And I think you should check out Little Fires Everywhere, too. I think you should watch the Hulu show and read the book. I think Celeste Ng has some brilliant things coming for us in the future. I really love the honesty with which both of these books tackle really serious issues. Racism, for example, is a pretty big theme in both books, but it's done in a very everyday sort of way. What I mean by that, and obviously I'm speaking as a white person, so my opinion is only so important here, but what I think is really interesting is the way these books examine casual racism. So many books either don't touch race at all, or if they do, it's about the really heavy, what we think of as the serious parts of racism. Police brutality, murder, hate crimes, slavery, and all of those are really important things to talk about. But it's also really important to talk about the kind of racism where people just don't let you fit in, which kind of happens to Pearl in Little Fires Everywhere, when one of the main characters implies that she's probably biracial, and it's sort of like, you're kind of more like us. And that's really prominent in Everything I Never Told You. That level of racism, I think, is one that probably a lot of people of color experience that isn't talked about in a lot of stories. And I thought it was really insightful, the way that it's tackled in both of these novels. I also love that they're both just really honest looks at motherhood and the darker side of motherhood. I don't think any of the mothers in these stories don't love their children, but I think there's this sort of contention and play in all of them, where there's a disconnect between the identity of who the person is and who the mother is. And I mean, Celeste Ng is far from the first person to write about that conflict of identities, mother versus self, but really like the diversity of motherhood experiences that she portrays too, especially in Little Fires Everywhere, because we have looks at many different mothers. We have looks at mothers who struggled to become mothers, mothers who weren't sure they wanted to be mothers, mothers who are too attached to their children, and mothers who don't really like their children. And then, of course, we have all of the elements that would come with any coming-of-age story, being that most of our main characters are teenagers. Both of these books are about all of these things, and I am really impressed by the way that they tackled all of them. So if I was going to give Everything I Never Told You a rating, I would say probably like an 8.5 out of 10. I enjoyed all of it. I thought it was really well written and consistent throughout, and it was beautiful. I will probably do a review of Little Fires Everywhere eventually, because I would definitely give that one a 10 out of 10. It's one of my new favorite novels, and it inspired the heck out of me. So that was my review of Everything I Never Told You. Definitely check it out, and I'm gonna leave a link to it in the box below. Also, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to follow up with everything else that I've been reading and listen to my poems that I'm working on, all of that on this channel. So click the button if you're into all that. If not, just thanks for checking this one out, and I will see you soon. Bye.